I've never been big on dating apps, but after some convincing from friends, I decided to give Tinder a shot. My first 2 dates were pretty uneventful, just awkward small talk and no real connection. But it was the third date that still haunts me. I matched with a girl named Annette. Her profile had just 4 photos. All of them were solo shots, mostly in what looked like her backyard. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. She seemed attractive enough, and our conversation flowed easily, so I didn't hesitate when she suggested hanging out that night. I remember feeling a mix of excitement and nerves as I waited for her to arrive. My room was in the basement of my parents' house, which had its own entrance, so it felt private, like my own space. When Annette texted me that she was outside, I was impressed with her punctuality. But as soon as she walked in, something felt off. She was pretty, just like in her pictures, but there was something about her demeanor that made me uneasy. Her responses were clipped, almost as if she didn't want to be there. And when she laughed, it felt forced, like she was trying too hard. I asked her a simple question about her drive over, and instead of answering, she just stared at me with these wide eyes and laughed. But not at the TV or anything I said, just at me. My mind was racing. I tried to stay calm, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But the more I tried to engage her in conversation, the stranger she acted. She never looked at the TV I had turned on, never glanced around the room. She just watched me, intently, the entire time. The vibe was so off that I decided I needed to get her out of there, and fast. I faked a text from my boss, telling her I had to go to work early the next day. She seemed disappointed and lingered at the door longer than I was comfortable with. But eventually, she left. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I locked the door behind her. I flopped down on my bed, replaying the weird encounter in my mind, wondering if I'd overreacted. But then, just 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Annette. "Are you sure you have to go to bed? I was having fun." My stomach dropped. I ignored it, hoping she'd take the hint. But my phone buzzed again and again. The messages became increasingly insistent, filled with question marks and demands for an explanation. It was like she couldn't accept that the date was over. Annoyed and a little freaked out, I blocked her number and tried to go to sleep. But something kept nagging at me. I'm a light sleeper, and that night, I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling more anxious than usual. Instinctively, I reached for my phone on the ledge where I'd left it charging, but it wasn't there. Now I know I'm forgetful sometimes, but I was absolutely certain I'd put my phone there. I sat up, squinting in the dim light, and started feeling around for it. After a few minutes of frantic searching, I decided to use the landline phone upstairs to call my number. The ringing led me to the boiler room, just off my bedroom. I pushed open the door, and there it was. My phone, vibrating loudly on top of the washing machine. My blood ran cold. I hadn't been in the boiler room that night, and I certainly hadn't left my phone in there. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and saw a series of texts from an unknown number. The first one read, "Nice job blocking me." Then came the real kicker, "Lock your door next time." Attached to these texts were pictures of me sleeping in my bed. Panic set in as I realized what had happened. Annette, or Silvana, as I later found out was her real name, had never actually left. She must have snuck back into the house while I was distracted, leaving those photos and moving my phone to terrify me. I didn't even have the courage to check the boiler room to see if she was still there. I just bolted upstairs, woke my parents, and called the police. Silvana was arrested not long after. Apparently, she wasn't too careful about covering her tracks online, making it easy for the police to find her. She was charged with breaking and entering, stalking, and harassment. I got a restraining order, and thankfully, I've never heard from her again. But the memory of that night still lingers, a constant reminder of how dangerous it can be to invite strangers into your life. After those unsettling experiences on Tinder, I swore off dating apps for a while, but my friends wouldn't stop telling me about this new app called Hot or Not. They said it was different, that they were having better luck there. I was skeptical, but eventually I caved and decided to give it a try. Right from the start, I noticed I was getting more matches, though, to be honest, they weren't exactly my type. Then I matched with Julia, a blonde with a warm smile and sparkling blue eyes. She stood out. Our conversation felt natural, and we clicked instantly. It was one of those rare moments where everything just seemed to line up perfectly. We quickly moved from the app to Snapchat. I asked for her number, but she preferred to keep things on Snap for now, which didn't bother me too much. Her Snap score was low, which made me a bit suspicious. Low scores often mean a new or fake account. But when I asked her for a selfie to confirm she was real, she sent one almost immediately. It was the same girl from the pictures, smiling and holding up a peace sign. I was relieved, thinking I'd just been paranoid. After chatting a bit more, Julia invited me over to her place. She sent me her address, and I even checked her Snap map to make sure the location matched. Everything seemed legit, so I agreed and got ready to head out. As I drove across town, I remember feeling a little too excited, maybe even overconfident. I had a good feeling about Julia. She seemed like someone I could really connect with. But when I arrived at the address she gave me, something felt off. The house was dark, with no cars in the driveway. The lawn was overgrown, like it hadn't been cared for in weeks. I tried to shake off the unease and walked up to the door. I rang the bell, but there was no answer. I knocked louder, hoping someone inside would hear me. Still, nothing. I pulled out my phone to send Julia a snap, letting her know I was there. But she didn't open it. I started to wonder if I'd been pranked, and that's when I heard a voice from across the street. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" an older woman called out. For a second I thought it might be Julia, but when I looked over I saw a woman in her 60s standing on her porch looking concerned. "I'm here to meet someone," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Nobody lives there," she said, shaking her head. "That house has been empty for months." My heart sank. I thanked her and got back into my car, feeling like a complete idiot. As I sat there, processing what had just happened, I pulled up Julia's Snap again, only to find that she had blocked me. I realized then that the whole thing had been a setup, but I couldn't figure out why. Later, when I told my friends about the experience, one of them recognized Julia's photos. "That's Lisa," he said, his voice dropping. "She died 2 years ago." Another friend confirmed it. Lisa had overdosed on heroin, and the pictures on Julia's profile matched her perfectly. The realization sent chills down my spine. Someone had used the identity of a dead girl to lure me to an abandoned house. To this day, I have no idea who or why. All I know is that I narrowly avoided something potentially dangerous, or worse. I've always been careful with dating apps. I knew the risks, and I didn't want to end up in a bad situation. But one night, after a tough week, I decided to try Tinder again, just for fun. I wasn't expecting much, maybe just a few chats. That's when I matched with a guy named Eric. He was good-looking, with dark hair and a nice smile. His profile showed him hiking and traveling, and his bio was funny. We started talking, and he seemed really nice and interested in me. After a few days, Eric suggested we meet up. He said he had tickets to a local concert and asked if I wanted to go with him. I was nervous, but decided to give it a shot. We planned to meet at a cafe before the concert. The night of our date, I got to the cafe early. I didn't want to be late, but as I waited, Eric didn't show up. I texted him to see if he was coming, but he didn't reply. I waited for almost an hour before I realized he wasn't coming. I was disappointed and ready to go home when I got a text from Eric. He apologized and said something came up. He asked if we could reschedule. I was annoyed, but I decided to give him another chance. A few days later, we made new plans. This time, he suggested coming over to my place to cook dinner together. I was hesitant, but I agreed. He said he'd bring everything we needed for pizza. The night of the dinner, I cleaned up my apartment and got everything ready. Eric texted that he was on his way, and I felt both excited and nervous. But when he arrived, something felt off. He was carrying a grocery bag, but he seemed different, darker, more serious. His smile didn't look real. I tried to ignore it and went along with making the pizza, but our conversation was awkward. He wasn't as friendly in person as he had been online. As the night went on, Eric started asking strange questions. He wanted to know about my past relationships, my family, and even my money. I felt uncomfortable and tried to change the subject, but he kept asking. My gut was telling me something was wrong. I went to the bathroom to think of a way to get him to leave. While I was in there, I heard a creak from the living room like someone was moving around. My heart started racing. I slowly opened the bathroom door and looked into the hallway. The lights were dim, but I could see Eric's shadow moving toward my bedroom. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone and quietly called 911, telling the operator that there was a stranger in my apartment. I stepped into the hallway, trying not to make any noise. When I reached the living room, I saw Eric in my bedroom, looking through my drawers. My hands were shaking, but I knew I had to stay calm. I called out to him, "Hey, is everything okay?" He turned around slowly, with a strange look in his eyes. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. He said he was just looking for a place to put his jacket. I pretended to believe him and told him I'd take care of it. He handed me the jacket, and when our fingers touched, I felt a chill. I could feel him watching me as I pretended to hang up his jacket, all the while listening for the sound of police arriving. The air was thick with tension, and I could tell Eric knew something was up. He started walking toward me, slowly and deliberately. "So, how about that pizza?" I said, trying to sound normal. He stopped and looked at me with a cold expression. Then he laughed, a low, creepy laugh that made my skin crawl. "You're right," he said. "Let's get back to that." But just as he turned to head back to the kitchen, there was a loud knock at the door. The police announced themselves, and I felt a wave of relief. Eric's face darkened, and he knew he was caught. The police came in and quickly arrested him. I explained everything to them, still shaking from fear. When they searched him, they found a knife hidden in his jacket pocket. Eric wasn't even his real name. He had a criminal history and had been using fake profiles to lure women. That night, I realized how close I'd come to being hurt. I learned to always trust my instincts and to be more careful when meeting people from online. You never really know who's behind the screen.